Hello, everybody. Welcome to Arsenal Pass State of the Meta, Episode 1. This is going to be a podcast weekly, sort of like Time in the Round, free form, but we're going to focus very much on the metagame of Flesh and Blood, specifically class constructed, and I assume a bit of Blitz as we head into that season as well. So, week by week, sometimes we'll go through calling seasons, professional seasons. So it's going to be, constructed calling after constructed calling. But sometimes, maybe there will be a little bit of a downtime and we might do some episodes on retrospectives of old formats or anything of that nature. Anyway, we're recording 2 days after U.S. Nationals. We're going to do a bit of a look back on the weekend's results, as well as talk about how that's going to shape the metagame moving forward. So Hayden, let's talk about the day one breakdown. So Briar gets in at around 25%,
yeah,
25 to 30%, right?
We actually had a bit of an in-house bet on how much Briar would show up, and originally I think Brendan said 30, but he said 25 to 30. So you ended up being correct. I thought it was going to be somewhere around 20, but ended up being just over 25%, so just over a quarter of the metagame. We're talking day one of US Nationals here. So of course the calling weekend, you have the Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Friday, that's day one US Nationals. We get 5 rounds constructed on day one. Mm-hmm. So this is the first look at basically the biggest class constructed format event of this new format.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it was like an interesting call to because we saw Chain and Monarch was probably a good thing to look back on when you're trying to predict how much of a deck will show up. So Briar the week prior in UK Nationals goes 9-0, because I think they had 6 rounds of draft. Stringed event, so a lot of people got to see how the deck works and what it was trying to do. The deck was also very linear and actually pretty cheap to buy into, so I expected a lot of switches because of that. It was also very punishing if you sat on the other side of it and you didn't really know what it was trying to do. Yeah. So while with Chain, I think that Chain was significantly more dominant and powerful than Briar in actuality. Briar was just a bit more, I wouldn't say it was, I don't know, the barrier to entry was a bit lower, probably.
Yeah, we're talking about the Lightning Briar. So this is all, we're talking in terms of that 25% number at US Nationals, that's all Briar, but the majority of that, walking through the tables in Orlando this weekend, was Lightning Briar. I would say, maybe 1 in 10, 1 in 15 of those were Earth Briar or a Fusion Briar, a mixed Briar. But, coming off that, like you say, the deck's easy to pick up. Mm-hmm. A lot of people picked it up. It's pretty easy to build. It's pretty straightforward. And in terms of playing at an 80% level, you can get there pretty quickly with a few reps.
Yeah, absolutely. So see it on day one, and we'll talk about a little bit how it performs. So let's talk about some of the other decks that showed up. So I have it in front of me right now, coming in at second, and I think this is around a little bit under half the representation of Briar. So
it's about 13% of the metagame, I think it was, or about 12% of the metagame was Bravo.
Bravo, yeah, which I think was actually a pretty reasonable pick here, right? Bravo got a lot of tools. Had cards like Terra Sunder. So the aggressive strategy of Bravo, and specifically, did look to be pretty well positioned for this meta.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we looked at coming out of the last meta, right? So Chain goes away, and then you go, okay, what's the natural progression of the metagame? Well, it's for Prism and Bravo probably to come and have that dominant share of the meta to start with. And I think you look at some of the early events we saw coming into the new class constructed meta. You saw that there was Bravo and Prism was sometimes nearly 40% of metas in that early time, and it's a pretty diverse metagame, so that's a big chunk of it. But these Bravo decks, obviously, like you say, new tools in Terra Sunder, the Shield, if people wanted to, and we saw a lot of Shield show up this weekend as players look to actually fatigue the Briar decks and play the Titans for Shield game plan. But other than that, the one that really stood out to me, and I saw it at the top tables as you walked around, was this build that looked to be a lot more aggressive into Briar. So rather than try and fatigue it, right, the list that probably I saw doing better over the weekend, especially US Nationals as well, was that list that had, the 6 Dallas Beltings potentially, 6 Pummels, Terra Sunder turns, and looking to be really proactive into these decks and get those crush effects off.
Yeah, and just to kind of give our opinions as well, I think that was probably the better strategy. I mean, to try to fatigue a Lightning Briar is kind of a funny concept to me. And obviously, they were playing the Arcane Barrier 2 to try to play around this, kind of ball lightning pump, but not very relevant when you're staying ball, right?
Yeah, so I think coming off the back of the UK Nationals, the deck that was piloted first, right, probably wasn't as set up for a fatigue plan. So I think that was kind of the reaction, was people probably testing into that version and thinking that, okay, well, fatigue might be the way to go. But if you look at, the list that ultimately wins US Nationals and Tarek's list and a lot of lists that were floating around, a lot more equipped to deal with the fatigue plan. So, stings, ball, whatever it might be, these end games.
I feel like it's more of actually, what's interesting that this is kind of, very juxtaposed to Chain as well, is that I think Chain's strategy of Fatigue was very skill-based, but Briar's is almost completely skill-based, right? Where the tools that you need in Briar to beat Fatigue are actually quite minimal, right? They're just,
they're just good cards in your deck.
Yeah, I mean, it's like effectively 5 cards, right? You're going to have a couple extra copies to account, maybe Severus, maybe you have the Pulsive Candlehold to kind of recycle them back in. But ultimately, it's just kind of a skill thing. So, I don't know. It's interesting how that goes with Briar. I think that pretty much every Briar list can be equipped to just beat Fatigue. When we talk about beating Fatigue, it's quite consistent, right? I think that the only kind of way you get ahead of Briar and where they lose a Fatigue is where you're kind of coupling that with pressure, which I don't think Bravo does well, but I think Old Time can do that.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, just thinking about the progression of the events we've had, obviously UK Nationals and US Nationals this past weekend, and I think by the time that we probably put this up, there's another weekend of Nationals happening right now, going on as we speak. So there's probably going to be more progression again as we head into this weekend as people look to adapt to what ended up happening in US Nationals. And in the calling, which I'm sure we're going to talk about because we both played in that calling, of course, but Old Time ends up winning that. So there's a deck that, I mean, if we just, we've talked about first, second in terms of the metagame breakdown for this class constructor format at Nationals. We talk about Old Time. Only 11 players on Old Time in the US Nationals. It was, a couple of % in that metagame.
Yeah, absolutely. And we actually saw Old Time. I wasn't too sure about how it actually looked at Nationals, but Old Time in the calling, we'll get to this as well. But at the calling, if you looked at the top tables at the end of day one, like the XOs and X1s, it was very diverse. Like we saw some Lexis up there, we saw some Old Times. But I want to kind of go back to, we said, Prism and Bravo, right? Those are the ones that kind of looked to be pushed up after Monarch when we saw Chain take some bannings. But we talked about Bravo, and I think you can't really talk about Bravo without talking about Prism, because Bravo's, debatably one of Bravo's worst matchups is Aura Prism, which is, I think that was overwhelmingly the archetype that we saw out of Prisms on, was going to be that kind of control-y Aura, and then with Bravo, you can just totally lock them out of the game.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that was kind of the concern coming into this meta was Prism was probably like the deck to beat, right? Like if you were going to say the first round of Nationals, maybe that was UK Nationals, or you were going to play in a class constructed event that weekend, say 2-3 weeks after Tales of R8, you had to be able to beat Prism.
Yep.
And that's, I think, honestly, where we're seeing the rise of Lightning Briar. And if we talk about the state of the meta, while we're in a flow stage at the very beginning of the meta where there was a deck to beat, a deck's come up that really gives that deck such a tough time that it's really unfavored as the Prism player, whether you're on Prism, like the traditional Aura play. I think you have a bit more game if you're on Heralds. You can potentially win that matchup because if you're just aggressive output and you can actually match damage in some ways. So then Briar comes up. So if you talk about it, it's a pretty natural state of the meta to have that deck come up and challenge Prism.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that initially when we looked at how are we gonna beat this deck? How are we gonna beat Prism? A lot of the initial ideas that float around are things like Rhinar. And obviously we were on Earthbriar before. I think Earthbriar has a overwhelmingly good matchup into Prism, right? Like even Herald, Earthbriar just kind of absolutely destroys Prism. But I think overall Prism, if we look at the results of both US Nationals and the calling, Prism is the biggest loser of the weekend in terms of representation and then how it performs.
I think you're going to get a bad rap for continuing to say that Prism.
I mean, this people think that it's me, but I'm just the messenger, right? That is the statistical
data does not lie. And no, I mean, you look at so I don't know if we have a conversion into day 2 for US Nationals, but you can look at conversion into top 8.
Yeah.
You can look at just anecdotally walking through top tables. Prism was not at those top tables, so I guess so. You look at if we could look about US Nationals, 5 rounds constructed on day 1. Round 4, which is the first round I've constructed, not really much to pay attention to because it's just come from draft, right? But once we get to past round 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8, the last few rounds of the day, that's when we're really starting to see some development happen. And I'll tell you what, not a lot of Prism at those top tables ending that day. Yeah,
like you said, anecdotal evidence of kind of walking around, but felt it as well in terms of the calling. And then as we went into day 2, just not to. I mean, I almost saw no Prisms.
I know neither of us played Prism in the calling.
Dante neither.
And just actually looking around at those top tables and looking at who was X and 1 and 8 and 0. I don't think there was any Prisms there definitely wasn't an X1, and I don't think there was even one at X1 either. So
didn't see any. So let's talk about some of the other decks that came in. Pretty much usual select decks. So we saw some Katsu.
Fourth most.
Yeah, Katsu's an interesting pick because obviously aggro Katsu, still probably well positioned. Just like how does it do into Lightning Briar is the question. And then we look at I talked a lot about Katsu Control in the last meta and how that was maybe, in my opinion, the worst deck.
Yeah.
I don't think that anymore. I think that Katsu controller mid range is sort of a attrition, and effectively using flick flack potentially could be maybe a better strategy into Lightning Briar than a traditional aggro list.
Yeah, I think so. We tested the aggressive matchup like a reasonable amount, and then just from again being in the event this weekend and looking around these Katsu, majority were aggressive based Katsu decks or aggressive into mid range based decks. Not really any control decks, and that's because actually it's really tough. Again, we talked about the fatigue strategy and the attrition strategy against a deck like Briar, but then you're trying to run that plan into Prism's still gonna be around. Exactly. You're trying to run a control plan into Prism. It's still the third most played deck. You're trying to run that into Bravo. Maybe that's okay. But if you're looking at the top 3 decks and going, I'm not really feeling fantastic about any of my matchups against the top 3 decks. Is that what you want to be on? So I think that's why we saw more of these aggressive based Katsu decks show up. Fourth most played though. What we had day one of US Nationals, we had 31 players on it, right? So about 6% of the 7% of the meta. So still a reasonable amount, but it's a really sharp drop off after you head from Bravo and Prism.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the deck after that is even more interesting to me because we saw Dash. Dash, it was interesting because Dash is the go-to deck that a lot of people want to be playing, right? Yeah. It's got very fond memories from Crucible of War. It was quite dominant. And then I think there's been a lot of people kind of looking to recapture that. We saw Dash not be represented in the meta back in Road to Nationals, and we saw someone pilot it to a win, and then we saw a mass adoption, right? Yeah. So coming into this meta, I think that Dash into Lightning Briar it's a pretty rough matchup, right?
Yeah, but I think it is. And actually, I had a conversation over the weekend with Alberto Miracle, who top 8 in Vegas playing Dash, just talking about the state of how you plan to Briar in this current meta. And Alberto was saying, I've played a lot into with an aggressive plan. I've tried to play more defensive with my plan, and neither feels favorable. The aggressive plan feels like if you can kind of string some of those high octane tome turns together really early on and keep that pressure on. If you can stop the Briar player getting into the mid game and getting that plunder on value, maybe you can pull it out, but it's really difficult. Yeah. But in saying that, you look at the second most played deck Bravo, third most played deck Prism, fourth most played deck Katsu. You can probably say you've got pretty reasonable matchups into those. So I think Dash, not a terrible pick, but you really needed to have a plan to at least feel like you could get close to being maybe 30-40% against Briar.
Yeah, absolutely. So our next deck here is going to be Chain. So right, we did see some serious bannings on the Chain list, but for the Chain actually had probably one of the best conversion rates. If we look at this, look at how it
not surprised either.
Yep, and also into the calling as well, did convert quite well there. Yep. And I think there was 2 at the top tables on day 1. And there was 1 for sure because both you and I lost the Chain, lost to that Chain eventually. But Chain into Lightning Briar. So while Chain has obviously lost tools in his toolbox to beat Fatigue, beat Prism Fatigue, beat Bravo Fatigue, whatever you want to say, it's got a good matchup in the Lightning Briar, and I don't think anybody would dispute that.
No, I mean, it has a great... You walk in with a deck in Chain that has 1 in 4 matchups is going to play as a very, very favorable matchup. And then if you even look at, the rest of the metagame, Bravo, I think, if, you're on the Fatigue plan, it's much more difficult now. I personally think from the Chain perspective, and we played a lot of this, Chain can win still. You can still beat Fatigue with Chain. It just it requires... It's a lot more difficult to do than it used to be. But Prism, I think you're still, again, it depends if they're playing Herald or they're playing the Fatigue version. Herald, I think you're still really favored against. Katsu, I think you're still very favored against. Dash, I think you're still very favored against. So you have a deck there that, maybe, the second most played deck you're not as favored to, but then the rest you have a pretty good time against. I think that works out pretty well.
Yeah. And then kind of finally closing out the last few years here, obviously we already mentioned Old Time. We'll talk a little bit about our personal experiences against Old Time in the calling, but the old Viserai. So Viserai, obviously, Matt Rogers piloted that to a top 8 finish in the calling. But, the difference in Viserai list was actually the most of it. We had some tempo mid-range. And then we had, Matt's list, which was kind of mid-range, but also could, pivot to an OTK plan.
Had an in-game setup. Yeah. And I know I spoke to a lot of players over the weekend at US Nationals and in terms of a few players playing our list as well, from the deck guide and the deck tech that we put out last week. I think, a lot of players knew and had this idea that Viserai was going to be good in this matchup. They played Viserai into Briar. Feels pretty favorable. It depends on your list, but it's definitely just Viserai lines up well into Briar naturally, just because of that split damage, and the on-hit effects are really difficult for Briar to deal with. Never pitching to prevent arcane damage, never really wanting to defend these awkward attacks, especially if it's multiple attacks a turn. And if you can set up an in-game strategy against like the Fatigue decks, which is actually not that difficult to do once you've practiced it. Viserai, I honestly think Viserai is one of the best positioned decks coming into this weekend, and we're going to talk a bit about where we think
the future
of the meta. But I think Viserai,
I think,
spoilers.
Yeah,
It's in a good spot.
Spoiler alert, it's the deck that I'm most excited to kind of play after this event. Just kind of in finality here, two more decks I'll talk about. One being Bolton. Bolton, I mean, from a theory standpoint, I didn't test it and played against it, but from a theory standpoint, Bolted into Briar has got to be rough, right? Because they've got the non-attack actions, they got the embodiments, they should be able to deny you soul significantly in terms of on-hit triggers. Then when you do combo, usually when you're comboing, you're not blocking. They do get 2 to 3 embodiments on that turn. Not only will they have the armor, but they also, if they draw, this is kind of the variance, is the Lightning Briar. But if you do draw the non-attacks, I mean, you could blank a Lumina combo.
You brought draw 3 non-attacks, you probably are blanking it. You got 3 attacks plus 2 to 3 embodiments. You've got 3 embodiments. You're blanking that turn plus your equipment. So we didn't test it, but the team did test it. The feedback we got was not good for Bolton. But in saying that, I think what we saw was these hybrid builds. If we talk about Bolton right now, hybrid builds, right? Sabres, Raiden, and working out where they're going to play that Raiden build versus that Sabres build. And the Sabres build for me tends to end up coming where matchups are a bit unfavored, and you just have to go for that combo and just kind of smash the matchup as much as possible.
So finally, in closing here, I got to talk about Lexi. Both Ice and Lightning. The Lightning lists have performed pretty well as well, but Ice is like, if we talk about theoretical counters to Lightning Briar, I mean, Ice Lexi comes to the front of our mind, right?
Channel like Frigid, actually.
Yep. Exactly. Well, Channel like Frigid, I mean, there's also the Blizzard Bolter are quite annoying.
Blizzard.
Deck. Yeah, Blizzard itself. But we saw Isaac, is it Jensen, I think?
Isaac from the Tech Action podcast.
His last name. Does top 8 at Nationals with an Ice Lexi. So, that represented less than 11 people were on that deck. Because we can't even see it on the meta breakdown here.
Yeah. So just to run through, right? So we had Briar, Bravo, Prism, Katsu, Dash, Chain, Bolton, Viserai. And then Old Time's the last deck that we actually get a percentage of, and that's like a couple of percent, right? 11 players on Old Time. And then the rest, which is others, so all the other heroes in the format, the Reinars, the Levias, the Lexis, the Azaleas, the Kanos, they're a couple percent in total. So, we're seeing like a handful of people of a 460 odd person event playing these decks. So really minimal representation currently this meta, and to be honest, it didn't change much on the calling. I'd say maybe a bit more of the Ice decks, Lexi and Old Time from Nationals calling. Maybe a little bit more. But not much. But if you look at conversion on those decks, those lowly played decks, pretty good. Old Time, a couple percent. Lexi, maybe 1% it looks like played. Lexi in the top 8. Multiple Lexis on the top tables. Multiple Old Times on the top tables as well. So same with this, right? Those decks really overperformed this weekend when you look at conversion. Yeah, and I think that I love that narrative too, because I think it kind of reinforces our idea that, Briar, I don't think is a degenerate deck. I think it's a really good deck. I think it's really proactive, but it's very targetable. And most of the top players that I know, even the people that took this deck to great finishes on this past weekend, overwhelmingly those players will say, I don't expect the deck to kind of be where it is in a couple weeks, right? Because if your Ice Lexis increase, your Old Imps increase, this Viserai deck, which is actually one of the ones that kind of surprised me, in terms of being very powerful versus Lightning Briar. That deck's gonna have a target on its back, and I think that deck with a target on its back becomes much worse. Where Chain is you can put a target on Chain's back. Old Chain doesn't change anything. Didn't change much. But the cool thing as well is that not only does it have a target on its back, but you can play multiple different heroes and multiple different strategies into that. So you look at we talk about some of these heroes that we think have good matchups into Lexi. Okay, Lexi's probably going to play a pretty aggressive plan that's going to try to be disruptive with these flipping out, making frostbite tokens, getting channel like Frigid, but keeping tempo, trying to play a tempo game. Flip over, Viserai probably looking to get in a bit of early damage and then just get these on hit effects and just smack them with a couple of big turns, Sonata turns, use the creepers, use the Skeletor. It's a bit more of maybe if you look at Matt's deck, a bit more combo based. Our list was a bit more aggressive with the on hit effects. Both feel pretty good into Briar. And then you look at Old Time, it's a bit more of funnily Old Time. You talk about the state of the meta and when Old Time is right now. A lot of players that you played against in Old Time were looking for a fatigue kind of in-game strategy. But we look at Michael, who ended up winning the event, wasn't on a straight fatigue plan. He was trying to play this tempo-based Old Time deck. I actually played him in round 4. He struck me on turn 1. And Lightning Strike on turn 1 was not what I was expecting. And definitely had not sideboarded for that. And he was able to use that Winter's Wail super effectively, plus hold out damage via the hero ability. And just really effective.
Yeah, and I think from there that transitions well. We'll talk about the future in a little bit, but let's just talk about our experiences at the calling specifically. So we were on Lightning Briar. We made that switch. So previously at the U.S. Nationals was on Earth Briar. Didn't go so well, so I ended up on Lightning Briar for the calling. So we played the calling day one. We both go X and 1. Mm-hmm. What are kind of your big takeaways? I know you played 7 different heroes. So that's okay.
Yeah. I mean, my kind of takeaway, and it's anecdotal, right? Because it's just me, and I know there's data behind it, but there was a lot of Briar, no doubt. There was also really good representation, and there was really good representation at the top tables as well. So obviously you have a lot of Briar running into each other, mm-hmm. but you also had a lot of players who had strategies to beat Briar. Like a lot of the players that I talked to, obviously I played the old time in round 4. I played against a Rhinar player. I played against a Chain player. I played against a Bravo. They were beating Briars, right? It wasn't like they weren't beating Briars. So my kind of takeaway was that if you look at just the metagame share, Briar was really represented. It was again about 20% to 25% of the meta for the calling on day one. But the top tables, so who in X and O we had a Lightning Briar with Dante, we had a Chain, we had a Bravo, and
I'm not sure about the fourth.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the fourth. It might have been an old time actually that went X and O. But I played an Ice Elixir on the last day, and Dante played multiple Ice Elixirs at the top tables. You walked around, and I think once you got to Nationals day 2, there was a lot of Briars at the top tables. Mixed in with some Chain and maybe a couple of old time left. But at the calling, it felt actually more diverse, and I think that was just because players had even just an extra day. They'd heard about strategies to beat old time. I beat Briar, with like an old time, etc., and picked these up. It was cool to see.
Yeah, so I mean, let's just talk about what I lost to in the calling. So Hayden ended up going 8-3. I went 8-3 as well. So I lost to Chain. I lost the same Chain that you did.
Yep.
That was on my day 1. So I went X and 1 losing a Chain. And I started out my day 2 with an old time fatigue. So I beat an old time fatigue in the Swiss rounds. And that actually kind of hurt me because I had sideboarded definitely incorrectly for that. And then I kept that bad sideboard into the other one. So then in this other list, it was very fatigued still, but it was pressuring me a bit more than the other player was. And that's what made it hard. I just had a lot of cards to dig through to get to my, sting, blah, blah, blah. So I lose to Oldheim in round 1. And then round 2, where else would I rather be than sitting across from my Ice Elixir that's got Channel Lake Frigid? I was completely prisoned out of that game. Channel Lake Frigid was on the field for 3 flow counters, had another one in hand, flipped face up in Arsenal to keep that slot open. It was brutal. So I ended up losing that game. Then I'd play a Briar and a Bravo after that and finish it out. But I think losing to Chain, Oldheim, and then Ice Lexi, I felt that. I felt that target on my back. Those are the decks I lost to, the ones that were essentially tech to beat me.
Same on my side. So day 1, lose to Michael and Oldheim. And then start on day 2, I play Matt first round on the Viscerai deck, and that deck is very much geared to beat the Briar deck. You need to have a credible start to even race that. And then walk into the last round at X2 and then play the Chain that you also lost to. So 3 decks that I think have very good matchups into, at least 2 that have very good matchups, and 1 that the style that Michael adopted, good matchups into this Lightning Briar deck. So I think where we end up at the end of this weekend is actually a pretty healthy meta and a pretty exciting meta as well. Yeah.
I think one of the most healthy metas we've actually ever had, at least in kind of my recent knowledge. So let's talk about the future moving forward. What does it look like? Obviously, we don't have really high level events on the horizon.
We've got a few more nationals left, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
As this comes out, Canadian nationals it's probably started. It's going on. We've also got a few more. We've got Australia, New Zealand to come.
Australia, okay. So so I take that back. We do have some bigger events with Australia, New Zealand nationals. Those are going to be the most interesting. So let's talk about the future of this meta moving forward. We don't know if you're going to be before or after this.
We don't know. We don't know because we don't have the full details of the supplemental set. We don't have the full details of when New Zealand and Australian nationals will be, but it could fall before. But if not, you know what? There's a few more weeks of events, like you talk about. There's going to be events locally as well. I know, for instance, a store near me, they're putting on just like a big end of year constructed event, like a cash event. So there is things happening, right? So where are we going? What does the meta look like, right? So is Briar still going to be dominant?
Is it still going to be dominant? Maybe not. Is it still going to be popular?
Yes,
100%. But dominance is another question, right? It's kind of region based, right? It depends how flexible the region is to flex onto heroes that were previously unrepresented. So if it was like Chain, well, obviously we said Chain has a better matchup, but let's say it was randomly, let's say Prism had a great matchup into Lightning Briar. It'd be pretty easy for the collective group of players to go back to Prism just because so many people have played it before. But we talk about Viscerai, Oldhim, and
Ice Lexi.
Yeah, and Ice Lexi. those heroes were.
It's not a go-to. It's not dash, right?
Yeah, those have been a bit underplayed for a while. So how fast will the adoption be to these decks that do try to beat on Lightning Briar? But we talked about Chain, which is honestly that's one of the matchups that I really don't like playing. Is Lightning Briar.
In testing, so we had a chain list. I had a chain list pretty early on, which we actually played on the channel. We just played on that's basically the list that I've been running the whole time. I was slapping you guys on the Briar decks. It wasn't even like some of the matchups weren't even close. I know Zach just wanted to run his head into the wall about 10 or 12 times in a row and didn't win a single game.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's bad, but I think you're sitting at like a 60-40.
Like, it's definitely winnable.
You can win for sure. We run the Earth Briar there too, so like on Lightning Briar, I think it's like it's around that 60-40. It's not but you sit on it feels bad as the Briar. Like even if you win like the 40%, or you
feel like you've had something fall your way.
You're just getting pummeled by these Art of Wars, and the Carrion Husk is just that sucks. So I mean, it's good against Lightning Briar, but against Earth Briar, that was the one that hurt. Yeah, because Carrion Husk usually gets a lot more value. When we talk about Earth Briar.
So we took it. Briar's still going to shot, right? It's not going anywhere. We talked about these 3 decks that we think are probably the best position to attack this new metagame moving forward, which is the Viscerai, the Old Time, and the Lexi. But outside of that, we're still going to see Prism. We're still going to see some Bravo. I think what happens though in a natural progression of a metagame is a deck like Prism that's really struggled into this meta against the most popular deck drops down, right?
Yeah, you say that, but Prism denies logic.
Sure, but like if people are coming in and you're coming to a metagame and you go, how do I beat the number 1 deck? And that's the approach that majority of people are going to come with if they want to win an event. You're going to start to see a move away from some of those. And I think what we're going to see is a rise in popularity of Viscerai. We're going to see a rise in popularity of Lexi, Ice Lexi. We're definitely going to see a rise in popularity of Old Time. And I think we might even see a bit of a rise in popularity from this weekend of Chain. I think those 4 are all going to be rises this weekend. And I think Prism is definitely going to be a faller. I think Dash is going to fall a little bit from what we saw in this meta. I think Briar, we're going to see a little bit less representation, maybe initially. As we move through into the next.
That's going to be progressive. Right?
Yeah,
like, I think the line is going to have a pretty clear, just like a slight, slight decrease as we go from event to event to event. Yeah. Still a great deck. Still a very good deck. Still a great deck. Still a great pick. Even into those matchups that are considered bad,
but you still win.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. When we talk about something like Old Time, if you're a player that has a game plan for that and you know how to set the end game, I mean that for like 90% of players that could be the hardest matchup is Old Time Fatigue.
Yeah.
But if you're the right player with the right game plan, the right deck, it could be one of your easiest matchups.
Yeah, and Old Time's not easy to play on the flip side of that, right?
Yep.
So, the good thing about the Lightning Briar and its popularity and its success is also it's a really linear, proactive game plan, right? Old Time is definitely not that. There's a lot of nuance to it. There's end games to set up. There's pitch stack considerations. There's when to and when to not use your ability. There's when to and when to not attack with the hammer versus defending to try and like break up turns to give them the Frostbite token. So there's a lot of nuance to that. And same with Viscerai. Again, not an easy deck to play.
Definitely. So in closing here, let's start with the thought experiment, right?
Sure.
So let's say we have an event, not in 1 week, because 1 week is really like, that's kind of what stopped us from actually switching on to one of these.
Playing Viscerai
we felt like, we just didn't have enough time. Let's say we have an event, a major event 2 weeks out from now.
Yeah.
What deck are you looking at right now that you might play in that event?
Probably for me, it's going to be Chain, Viscerai, or Ice Lexi, I think. Because one of my concerns, and I'll just explain that quickly. My concern with Ice Lexi will be playing into a Prism and Bravo field, but I think we're going to see a drop off of that. So I would be a lot more inclined to play Ice Lexi. It's actually similar with Chain. I'd be worried about Bravo. And then Viscerai, I actually feel pretty good into that. The one that does worry me a little bit is Prism, right? And to an extent Bravo. But again, I think if those decks are dropping off and Briar, initially might even grow in popularity right before it starts to come down on that curve, won the Nationals. Those are probably the decks that I would look at playing. And I would look to make sure that I had a strategy to, I guess, still be able to deal with those next 3 most popular decks, which is still probably going to be, Cuts is probably still going to stay in that area.
Yeah, you got to have a rounded game plan, right? Even if you're targeting, some of these, we're looking at a diverse meta, or not diverse, but a dynamic, I think is a better word. Like a meta is going to be switching around. So even if your deck might beat up on Lightning Briar, I think you still have to have like a holistic game plan to be ready for other things to show up.
I think if it's 2 weeks from now, I'm probably taking Viscerai. I think just for me personally, played the deck a lot. I think you have a good matchup into Briar naturally, and there's some ways that you can tweak the list, and we saw that in the weekend to target some of these next 3 decks to not be soft to them. So I think probably I would end up taking Viscerai if I was going to an event and say 2 weeks time.
So for me, it's actually going to be also Viscerai. Chain is a very good consideration as well. I would before I would be able to kind of recommend Chain on a platform like this or like I think I need more practice with the new list into fatigue. If the fatigue is not like an 80 or 90, you're gonna have a hard time convincing me because I just hate losing to that strategy, right? And I think that Viscerai is just extremely well positioned, and I just love that deck.
It's so much fun to play as well. Yeah, I think the other one, if I was a Guardian player or I was someone who liked to play control decks all time, right? Like for me personally, it doesn't have as much of the play style that I identify with. I have played into and with that deck because I had someone, a very notable Guardian player, try and convince me to play all time, and he got close to convincing me. He slapped me around with it, but personally, not really my style. So that's probably why I would go with one of the Rune Blades, I think.
Awesome. Well, we hope you all enjoyed this first episode of Arsenal Past State in the Meta. We're looking to make this possibly like a weekly segment, sort of like Time in the Round, but being its counterpart that's focused on the competitive side of what's going on right now.
We won't be able to do this, unfortunately.
Yeah, with Meta. Unfortunately, this is the first and maybe the last for a while of us sitting next to each other and doing it in person. But we'll see. Let us know what you think. Let us know what you want to hear. Maybe in future episodes, segments we could add in. Any of that stuff is very much experimental at this point. But yeah, we hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.
See you later.